Well, good afternoon, folks, and thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. My name is John Roberts. I'm the Senior National Correspondent with the Fox News Channel, and it's great to be here at the World Medical Innovation Forum. This, by the way, is forum number 210. So if you're on YORN and you'd like to ask a question of our panelists, just get online and shoot it to me. I'll keep checking that. And we've got probably about an hour and 10 minutes here at this forum to talk about everything, and we want to give everyone an opportunity to be able to ask whatever questions you want to ask. The title of this panel is, we adjusted it a little bit from what it is in the program, New Frontiers and National Security Through Neurodevelopment. Why do we call it that? It's because we are facing an economic crisis in this country with Alzheimer's disease and other unrelated and related mental illnesses. You know, when you consider the number of people who currently have Alzheimer's in the United States and the amount of money, and we'll go over those statistics, that it takes to treat people on a yearly basis, and as you look at the baby boomer bubble that is aging as life expectancy increases, at some point those two lines are going to come together, and the amount of money it's going to take in direct costs to treat Alzheimer's disease and in related economic burden could really kind of almost tank our economy, and not only here in the United States, but then there's the global burden as well. So this is something that needs to be addressed now. How is the United States government and industry approaching that worldwide? What's going on? We'll talk about all of that today. Let me say, too, that I've got some personal experience with this because my mother passed away in 2010, March 1st of 2010, after about a 3 or 4 year battle with Alzheimer's disease. It cost the family hundreds of thousands of dollars to care for her. The cost of care is only going up. So you can see that as the number of people who have Alzheimer's disease increases, and it will increase dramatically in the years to come, the economic burden on families, on governments in the United States and around the world is going to put us potentially in an economic crisis, so that's why it needs to be addressed now. Let me introduce the panel, if I could. We didn't quite sit down in the order of the way that it was on the screen, but nonetheless, Michael Hodin is the Executive Director of the Global Coalition on Aging. He's a managing partner at High Lantern Group, a fellow at Oxford University's Harris Manchester College. From 1976 to 1980, he was also the legislative assistant to Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who people here in Massachusetts will know well. He was senior executive at Pfizer Incorporated for 30 years, where he created and led its international public affairs and policy operations. He's got his PhD in political science from Columbia University, an MSc in international relations from the London School of Economics, and his BA from Cornell University with honors. Seated next to Michael is Miri Polachek. She is an Israeli-American and co-founder of Israel Brain Technologies, whose mission is to accelerate Israel's nascent neurotechnology industry and establish Israel as a global brain technology hub. She holds a master's in health economics from Boston University and an MBA from New York University. Thomas Large is next. He's the Senior Vice President of Discovery and Preclinical Research at Sunovion Pharmaceuticals, which focuses on therapies that advance the science of medicine in the areas of psychiatry, neurology, and respiratory disease. Under his leadership, the Discovery Group at Sunovion is heavily invested in meeting unmet medical needs, focused on different approaches and new solutions, including in the area of neurobiology and research collaborations worldwide. Dr. Large holds a PhD in neurobiology physiology from Northwestern and has served as a faculty member of the Department of Neurosciences at Case Western Reserve University Medical School. And finally, Luc Truyen is the VP of Neuroscience, External Affairs, and chair of Johnson & Johnson's global fight against Alzheimer's disease. He has spent his career in academia and drug research and development, so he has a clear understanding and vision of where we are with neurodegenerative disease and where we're headed. He was trained as a neurologist, also holds a PhD in medical sciences, the classic chronic underachiever, we might say. Sorry we couldn't find a more esteemed group of people to talk to this afternoon, but we'll try to make do with what we have. First of all, why don't you each take 2 minutes to tell the audience what it is that you and the company that you're involved with is doing in this exciting field of new frontiers to combat neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric disease. Luke, you want to start us off?
Well, thank you, John, and I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to be part of this esteemed panel. So I'm a neurologist by training, as John already said, and worked in academia for about 10 years in multiple sclerosis, in fact. But then joined Janssen in 1998 and have been with Janssen ever since. Janssen, as most of you will know, has a long legacy in trying to address mental health and has a deep commitment also to address the scourge for our society, that's Alzheimer's disease. In that course, I've been part of the team that developed galantamine, and I've also been part of the organization that had a lot of lessons to learn with the development of bapineuzumab. And I'm very glad to see that some of our colleague companies took those lessons to heart and have been able to show us some encouraging signals lately. My current role in Janssen comes from that commitment to Alzheimer's disease and was an outcome of the G8 conference that was held December 2013 in London, where David Cameron actually launched a call subscribed to by the other health ministers that we need to really make a global effort in the fight against Alzheimer's disease because of the factors John already alluded to. By 2050, there will be over 120 million people worldwide with that. And in fact, since I've been speaking let's say 30 seconds time, 6 to 7 people worldwide receive the diagnosis. So it's 1 every 4 seconds. So we cannot not pay attention to this. So what do I do day in, day out? I coordinate for J&J, so Johnson & Johnson, all the external activities related to the public-private partnerships. So I'm involved with the Innovative Medicines Initiative in Europe, where we have an exciting project going towards European prevention of Alzheimer's disease that we just kicked off. Here on the US side, I'm working with George Radenberg from the COI initiative on building a US-based infrastructure that would allow us to make trials go faster. And then something I'm particularly proud of, I've been part of the team that worked with UK government that led to the establishment of the Dementia Discovery Fund of $100 million. But that size of the fund is maybe, it's not unimportant, but maybe what is even more important is the fact that that brings together a government, an NGO, and several companies in collaboration. And I think that's the way we're going to have to tackle Alzheimer's disease.
And we'll talk more about that during the panel as well. Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom Large, head of discovery preclinical research at Sunovion. We're actually a part of a global pharma company, a subsidiary of Nippon Sumitomo. And so we have interest in broadly in neurology and psychiatry. Currently, one of our most important drugs on the market is Latuda or lorazepam for schizophrenia and bipolar. So I got here beginning with Case Western Medical School as a faculty member in molecular pharmacology and genetics. Then spent time at about 9 years at Eli Lilly in the neuroscience group, and then came to Sepulchre, now Sunovion. My discovery group is really focused on psychiatry, and I know there's a heavy emphasis on neurology, Alzheimer's, and there should be at this meeting and on this panel. The situation in psychiatry is rather, actually from a drug discovery perspective, is rather grim, and I think as we talk, there'll be opportunities to show similarities and differences with what's going on the neurology side and the progress going on there. But before this panel, I sent a note to the group just asking them to look at what was going on at this meeting because it was so important. And I said, don't worry, I'm keeping the candle lit on psychiatry as we talk a lot about Alzheimer's and some of the other diseases, because mental illness, of course, is a huge burden as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, some estimates are upwards of $1 trillion in economic burden globally. Because the illnesses often strike early in life and then they're debilitating for the course of life. Now, what we're trying to do in the discovery group, and this is built on years of frustration with the failure in psychiatric drug discovery, is, I mean, basically we're trying to break as many rules as we can about how it's been done, because how it's been done just hasn't been working. And there's relative consensus among the psychiatrists and the scientists and scientists in pharma. And we're actually having good success with that, taking a different approach, and perhaps there's an opportunity to talk about it, also in the context of public-private consortium. But We're very interested in finding new mechanisms and new drugs, completely new mechanisms for mental health.
Sometimes you have to break a few rules in order to move ahead. Miri?
Thank you, John. And I first want to say I'm honored to be on this panel, but also to thank Tom for your focus on mental illness. I'm actually part of a family that's touched by and impacted directly by mental illness. So it's important that we always continue with that agenda too, from my personal experience. I work for a nonprofit actually called Israel Brain Technologies, which I helped to establish about 4 years ago. We're based in Israel. I'm originally actually from the Boston area, but I've been living in Israel for about 5 years. I come from the pharmaceutical industry originally, and this is my new initiative, first project in the nonprofit world. And our mission is to really support the entire life cycle of innovation in neuroscience and neurotechnology development in Israel. And we do that through various programs that really facilitate collaboration across the various sectors, industry, academia, government. We lobby for more funding from the Israeli government, and really try to make neuroscience and brain tech a top priority for the local government. As well as really through our programs, again, facilitate collaboration both locally and internationally. And we don't focus actually on any specific disease area within brain. We really try to support development and innovation across all the different areas, neurology, psychiatry, brain injury, brain cancer.
And you've got some very exciting things happening on the technological side of things too. That we'll
there are a lot
talk
of
about.
exciting things coming out of Israel. We also don't discriminate between modalities, so we really try to help all the different projects out there, whether they're therapeutics or devices or diagnostics, imaging, mobile apps that are now emerging at an amazing rate out of Israel related to brain illness.
Great,
So.
great. Hey, Michael?
Thank you. Other than having a cold. So about 4 or 5 years ago, myself and a couple strategic partners sat down and we looked at what we thought might be one of, if not the most seminal trends affecting society across the globe, and in particular, which the corporate world currently was not quite addressing, either from a standpoint of their business strategy or from the standpoint of their external engagement with government and with society. This demographic transformation that is upon us is the one that we settled on, which I believe is the mega trend of our time. It's basically we're living longer. We've added about 30 years to life in the second part of the last century. In addition to that, as many of us will know, there are these stunningly low birth rates across the globe. So not only are we living longer, but the population is aging. That is to say, more old than young as a proportion. Inside that, we started bringing companies together and decided to put together a group of about 20 global companies who we thought would be interested in this topic from an optimistic point of view. How do we transform this notion of aging, oh my God, there's all these old people, and what are we going to do about it, to a notion of economic drive, a notion of optimism. Among those on our roster, BlackRock, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Intel, J&J, Pfizer, GE. So you get the idea. Global companies with a very central interest in this topic of population aging. And as we look at the waterfront inside that broad framework, we said, what are the 2 or 3 challenges that really matter? And Alzheimer's is one of them. As John indicated and my colleagues have already begun to say, if we don't get this, this is about my daughters and their children. God willing, they have children. This is about the future. The current numbers, as John indicated, globally, $604 billion and 1% of global GDP, and we haven't even begun to get started because Alzheimer's is almost perfectly correlated with aging. And therefore, as we live longer in America and around the world, the numbers who will get it grows exponentially. It is a pandemic before our eyes, and we think that that's a particular topic that needs to be addressed.
All right. So when we were up in the prep room getting ready for the panel, I said to Michael, I said, what do you think kind of is the headline out of all of this in terms of neurodegenerative disease? When you look at this aging population and this baby boomer bubble, which is moving through, and what the economic burden is going to be. And he said, why are we failing so miserably to address this? So let me throw that out there. Luke, why are we failing so miserably to address this?
Well, I think that it's multifactorial, but the one I'll pick up on is a discrepancy between this tsunami that's coming and our level of investment across all stakeholders, public, private, to come to an answer. I mean, the easy diseases have been solved. Alzheimer's is a complex disease, and we need to put the appropriate level of resources against it. We're in the US here, so today even, the budget NIH provides for Alzheimer's research is about $600 million. You would say, oh, that's quite an amount of money. The amount that today still, with the treatments that are now more and more available, that is spent on HIV/AIDS is $3 billion. So I'm not anything against HIV/AIDS. I'm just saying there is a disconnect between the burden that's coming and the investment made. And the same is actually true in Europe, where only about a tenth of the available public-private funds have been targeted at neurodegeneration, and we need to change that.
Right. Tom?
Yeah,
Because there's also a failure when it comes to new drugs for mental illness as well.
yeah, that's right. I don't know what the number is from NIH, but it's actually probably less than Alzheimer's in terms of support for psychiatric research. And of course, what we do in pharma, we completely rely on academic research and NIH research to show us the way forward on mechanisms and illness mechanisms. So I would say that if you look at NIH funding, we went through this doubling about 10 years ago, and then it went flat, which means it's been going down. And I think some folks are calling for it to be doubled again. I think that's
including Newt Gingrich among them.
I think it's the right thing. I think it's the right thing to do. It's been frustrating on the neurology side and the Alzheimer's side in terms of trying new ideas and seeing if they work in the clinic. It's been doubly frustrating on the psychiatric side. We have in psychiatry a crisis. We're almost envious of what's going on in neurology in the sense of pharma companies are still invested in pursuing ideas, taking molecules into the clinic, doing big studies, and yet what we're seeing in psychiatry is many of the pharma companies actually reducing or getting out of drug discovery R&D. So I'm not sure where that leaves us going forward for the next 10 or 20 years, but I'm hopeful on the neurology side and for Alzheimer's and what we heard at the meeting today, last couple of days. I'm a little bit more worried, a lot more worried about psychiatry, both government investment as well as companies not willing to invest in it. And then when you get down to it, maybe a lot of the next generation of neuroscientists aren't going to be trained in this space or want to go into this space. And so then you could have a true gap in new medicines for people.
Yeah, again, as we were talking just prior to coming down here for this forum, Luke was mentioning that we're looking at this in the wrong way. He says we're looking at this as a disease process. What we really should be looking at it as is an economic crisis that's about to happen. So, Miri, if we don't address this, what happens?
Well, I think I'm trying to look at how we are addressing it, but just to follow on the gaps that my colleagues here were mentioning, where we're seeing in Israel, there's a big challenge. You have a lot of great science, actually, and great technologies being developed, but then there's kind of like a gap where, oftentimes a scientist doesn't know how to then, take the technology and turn it into a product and start a company and raise the resources in order to do, the clinical development and so forth. And so what we're working on doing, and part of this is also is raising awareness. I think part of the reason why we're failing is that there isn't enough awareness out there about the magnitude of the crisis, and of course there's stigma that's that also is still very prevalent in the field of mental illness. But I think that we need to raise awareness and also train a young generation of entrepreneurs that will want to take these amazing innovations and like in Israel, we're a startup nation. A lot of young kids coming out of college and the army, they all go and you hear about these mobile apps that are getting sold to Facebook and Google for $1 billion, and they're important apps. They're I don't go anywhere without my Waze, right, my GPS, but we're trying to raise a new generation of young entrepreneurs who will actually go into the life science industry, who'll want to partner with scientists and start the next technology company that'll diagnose, treat, monitor, cure Alzheimer's or bipolar or schizophrenia.
And we'll talk
and
about some of the technologies too that you've got going.
And encourage people to go into a world where there's not only tremendous opportunity, it may be risky, but you're also doing good while potentially ultimately making some money.
Well, Michael, you're an expert in public policy, so maybe the question should go to you: is what happens if we don't address this looming crisis, and how do we get government, companies, NGOs, whatever, to think about this differently, to not think about it as a disease, but as an economic crisis, as a national security issue?
What happens is we're screwed, to use a very technical scientific term. But let's back up, and having been dramatic in suggesting such a miserable failure, I'll sort of, to use a current political terminology, I'll sort of walk it back a little bit and be forgiving of ourselves. This thing is new. It is brand new, and I'm not talking about Alzheimer's. I'll get there in a second. But this demographic shift that we have, where we are living so long, and where the population proportion is transformed, where there's more old than young. By 2020, it will be true, certainly in developed countries around the world. It's going to be true in every country that modernizes, that urbanizes, that have the women's movement. We're just not making babies, and we're living longer, so the proportion is very young. So institutions of the 20th century that we invented and worked well against a certain demographic construction are not working in the 21st. And it's also true of how we think about health or how we think about particular challenges like Alzheimer's. So, we're just beginning to get there, and I guess the point to come back to Alzheimer's, as I think about it, until recently, it was basically a rare disease. And the scientists here will know better and correct me, but as a layman, Alzheimer's is nearly perfectly correlated with age. Not perfectly, but nearly perfectly. So it's been around for a while, but it's been a rare disease. And there hasn't been the inclination or motivation from a public health point of view to really dedicate the time, the effort, the money, the resources. Public health is about the numbers. Now that we are living longer, and the data are something like every 1 out of 8 if you're over 65, and 1 out of 2 if you're over 85, has risk of getting Alzheimer's or other dementia. It becomes a public health nightmare. It becomes a fiscal crisis if you don't address it. But it's brand new, and therefore, we're just sort of beginning to figure out how to address it.
All right, so how do we address it? We talked about increasing NIH funding. Newt Gingrich again suggested that we double it like we did a number of years ago. What about creating public-private partnerships? We were talking earlier that the WHO doesn't like to associate itself with pharmaceutical companies. Mm-hmm. But the WHO obviously is going to play a big hand in terms of disease worldwide, whether it be neurodegenerative, infectious, or otherwise. How do we change that paradigm? How do we get governments to work better with pharmaceutical companies who really are the ones who take what happens in academia and apply it and get it out there to market?
Well, I think part of this has to do with personal political leadership and driving this agenda. And I'll use the example of David Cameron in the UK, who really took a real personal and not a political interest in saying this needs to be addressed. And the UK government became a convener for NGOs in the UK and companies to say, what do we do? And that led to the G8 conference. It also led to the installation of the Dementia Platform UK, which is a new public-private partnership aimed at better understanding the disease, building experimental medicine tools so we can go faster from the bench to the clinic. So it takes, one of the ingredients to make this work is individual leadership. But of course, we don't want to be dependent on just political leadership because it's fleeting, and in May there's elections in the UK, and we cannot literally afford that and I hope he doesn't, but if David Cameron goes, that dynamic goes away. So I think a group of companies have now taken it up on themselves to say, okay, we need to come together and for us, think about how do we address Alzheimer's disease and make it a priority and try to maximize the pre-competitive space.
You know, in terms of drug development, is there something that the U.S. government could do to help accelerate the development of these drugs, to help bring them to market time? I know I had a stent put in last October, and they said, "Oh, too bad you didn't get this done in Europe because they could have given you one of the new stents that dissolves over the course of 2 years, and then you wouldn't have a stent anymore." And I'm thinking, well, where are these stents made in Europe? Oh no, they're made in California. So they're selling all this stuff in Europe, yet here in the United States you can't get a hold of it. So is there something the government could do to help bring these products to market?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One at the state level I can describe quickly, and then one at the NIH level. So at the state level, first of all, we're a part of a pre-competitive neuroscience consortium with 6 or 7 other pharma companies. It's run through the Mass Life Sciences Center. It's a quasi-governmental agency. It's not really big dollars. I think collectively we give out about $2 million each year to fund investigators in Massachusetts where we think we can get projects to the clinic faster, ideas that maybe wouldn't be funded by NIH. And the government, the Mass Life Sciences, acts as a catalyst and an organizer. And so that's a really valuable effort and function that they do at the state level. And we're trying to replicate it. I think next year we'll have proposals to get funded from Israel, for example. And so we're looking to expand that out. So there are things going on at the state level that are helpful. And then at the NIH level, whether it's been at Lilly or at Sunovion, there are a couple of examples of where the NIH will step in and help keep the science moving forward or even do clinical studies. And they tend to be in areas where pharma is reluctant to make big investments. So one would be stimulant abuse. And it's an act of Congress, actually, that NIDA goes in and looks for potential drugs and works with pharma companies that may have things, but they're not going to invest in them. They'll come in and they'll do the studies on those. And we've done that at Sunovion. It's very valuable because they can answer key questions like, will this be a valuable agent or not for stimulant abuse, because that's such a huge economic burden. And then there's PTSD is another area that's showing up in terms of government wants to catalyze and facilitate and fund. But for the most part, the funding for the clinical development has to come from the pharma companies. And so whereas NIH is helpful in certain areas, there's still a little bit of a legacy of, let's say, a wall or friction. So it can be difficult even to call up the head of one of the institutes at NIH if you're from pharma. I think they've told their admins not to let the calls through or something. But so there's a little bit of both standoff as well as facilitating and helping. And of course, I think whether it's in psychiatry or other therapeutic areas, the more we can work together, the better, because it's so hideously expensive to find and develop drugs.
Miri, take us to the global level. Are you getting the help that you need in speeding through new technologies,
Yes,
or could more be done?
There's always more that can be done. Obviously, along Tom's points, I think we're still not where we need to be in terms of opening the communication lines across all the sectors and across all the stakeholder groups. So the more we can have platforms that facilitate discussion, information sharing, joint funding, these consortia are fabulous ways of supporting research at various phases. What we're trying to do is really create international partnerships. So similar to, for example, what Tom just alluded to, joining either existing programs or creating new programs. We have, for example, a bill that Congressman Fatah, for example, who's visited Israel a couple of times, he's introducing a bill to try to get joint U.S.-Israel funding for collaborative R&D in neuroscience and in neurotechnology. So those are the types of things that we're working on, and we're trying to help. We serve really as a hub and as a marketplace to connect groups. So whether it's trying to help the young startups in Israel find research partners in academia or in industry or in the clinical community, or finding them early stage investors, whether it's helping some of the multinationals find interesting innovation in Israel. So I think the more we can open up and facilitate, share information, create platforms for collaboration, I think that'll catalyze the process.
Don't forget, if you're on Yorn, we're sessions 210 if you'd like to ask a question of the panel. So we need to have government involvement. We need to have private involvement. You've negotiated the Byzantine labyrinth of federal politics. Is there more that the United States can do? And globally, who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong?
Yeah, so on this one, that's the question. On this one, I find myself reluctantly supporting the FDA. That's not the problem. And if anything, as others in the room, scientists and others will know, they've actually supported some very innovative, what's referred to as pre-competitive collaboration among a lot of the companies that would be involved. The basic problem is we don't know, we don't understand, we don't have a basic understanding of the science. And in order to get there, as Luke and others have said, this is a global challenge that requires a global solution. I think the model, if you want to look at one in the health arena, is HIV/AIDS. HIV/AIDS went from a death sentence to a manageable illness in 20 short years. And it's because of the money and politics that was put forward, and it's because it was done at a global level. This is at that kind of dimension. The Japanese, who will have more old than young by 2020, they are a much older society than we are, living about as longer with far fewer young people. By 2020, the Japanese will sell more adult diapers than baby diapers. It's true. The Chinese, who are aging probably more rapidly than any country on the planet, have this topic as the big nightmare. So the third point I would suggest, as we've already been alluding, is that I don't even care if the WHO does or does not pay the attention to it that it ought to. They've actually come out with a pretty good report on it, which is fine, and I actually don't mean that. But the World Bank and the IMF need to address it. This is a fiscal and economic issue, and this will mortgage our children's future. And the final point on that is because of the character of the illness. It is not just a really horrible, bad disease. It is one, as we probably all know, that you're with for, 8, 10, 12 years. It destroys families, it destroys communities. And so it's more than just kind of another disease that could hurt you or even kill you. It's one that will ravage families and communities. And when you look at what's going on in China, that will pale. By the way, a strategy for us on beating China in economic growth is to let them suffer with Alzheimer's. I'm not suggesting it's a good idea, but they're in worse shape than we are. So it is a global issue.
Let me ask, has anyone posted a question to Yorn? If you put up your hand if you have. Because nothing's popped up on my tablet, so I just want to make sure I don't have a problem. All right, doesn't seem like anyone has. Let's move into psychiatric just for a second. Because Miri mentioned that she has psychiatric illness in her family. My wife and I, who's in the front row here, a neighbor of ours, young fella, when he was in high school, he was a lacrosse player, he was an Eagle Scout, he was one of the guys that everybody in the school wanted to be. Went to his first year of college, and something happened in the first year of college. His parents hadn't heard from him for a number of days. They decided, let's go to college and let's try to find out what's going on. They broke into his dorm room. It was an absolute disaster. There was food all over it, flies buzzing around, and he was kind of crashed out in the corner with a heap of blankets over top of him, and he just didn't want to face the world. It turned out that he had severe bipolar disease that manifested itself probably at about the age of 19. And it's my understanding, anecdotally at least, that that's about the time somebody who's susceptible to this, it manifests itself. We're obviously looking into genetic causes of disease. Tom, where are we with this sort of thing? And is there, I mean, what happens when a person reaches late adolescence? Do latent genes suddenly trigger? Is it a combination of things? What goes on?
Yeah, it's really not clear. I think, and we've heard it at the conference as well from others, psychiatric illness, in particular schizophrenia and bipolar, which are fairly closely linked actually, diagnostically. Those are really neurodevelopmental illnesses, and there's the claim that if you actually look back at family movies from when the kids were 8, 9, and 10, you can begin to see the behaviors, latent behaviors, and then you get the psychological break, often late adolescence into the early 20s, whether it's bipolar or schizophrenia. So the genetic mechanisms are not well understood. One of the really interesting scientific facts that have come out from the Broad Institute here, working with some global partners on this, the number of risk genes for schizophrenia and bipolar is, the first claim was it's hundreds. It may actually be several thousand. So it's not a monogenic. It's not a well. And what's interesting about that is that the industry, the pharma industry, has spent the last 20 years trying magic bullet drugs against individual targets, and then wondering why they don't work. Well, this really explains it. It's a systems problem. It's a circuitry problem. It's a problem of multiple factors, and you're not going to solve it with a silver bullet. We've kind of recognized that at Sunovion. We're trying to take a different approach. In fact, we're trying to find drugs in the way that the classic drugs were discovered 50 years ago, but just using the power of modern technology and chemistry. What you're describing, I think, yeah, a lot of families go through. My admin has a schizophrenic son, and we talk about it all the time because they go through different medications, and it's very disruptive to the family. So bipolar and schizophrenia, they're kind of like the cancer of mental illness, honestly. They're so devastating, and generally these folks are incapacitated for the rest of their life. They may be able to live independently, but probably not hold a job down.
And the economic burden of that long term is enormous as well.
Well, yeah, so the average schizophrenic patient, the care for treatment-resistant schizophrenia is about $200,000 a year, which I was surprised at when I heard that number. The average schizophrenic patient is about $30,000 to $40,000 per year care cost, but the treatment-resistant, of which it's about 35%, it's $200,000 a year. So, and that's for the rest of their life.
Wow. Miri, I don't know if you want to share your story, but if you do, maybe you could tie it in with some of the things that your company is doing to address mental illness and mental disorders.
So, like I said, we don't necessarily focus on any specific technologies or diseases, but we're definitely seeing a lot of really interesting applications and that are coming out. A lot of mobile applications lately that actually were featured in our recent conference in March. We hold an international conference every year. We have apps for like diagnosing and also treating ADHD, which is also another area that's becoming, it's like almost every household today is touched by ADHD. I think in general you could say about brain disease that everyone is really touched by brain disease.
Well, tell us about your MindLift app.
Well, MindLift is a brand new app. Actually, what's nice about that story, which is touching, personally for me, is that the young Israeli Arab entrepreneur who started the company, I think he's only like 21. He attended our first conference a couple years ago, and this past conference last month, he presented his company, and he told the story that he had attended our conference a couple of years ago and was inspired to, being at the conference and meeting all of the scientists and meeting, folks in industry and sort of being exposed to really to this important cause and issue of brain disease. He was inspired to start a company, also because he has 2 younger siblings who have ADHD, and so he got engaged with and learned about the science and about the tools that are out there, and he's developing an app that works with an EEG headset, which is actually now in Israel. You're seeing a lot of brain-computer interface related innovation, both for actually for clinical and consumer applications. And this is so he's developing, his company's developing an app that is like a neurofeedback type app for young folks with well, not only young, but for everybody with ADHD. My personal story, everyone has a story. My personal story happens to be not so different from the one you told, where my brother, around age 23, had his first psychotic episode, and later on he was diagnosed with what's called schizoaffective disorder, and he actually, I think primarily thanks to lots of love and support, which I think not everybody is lucky to have, but love and support and great medical.
Were there any warning signs prior to his first episode?
I don't know.
Nothing overt?
No, I don't think, and part of it is going back to the awareness, is, most people who haven't been, exposed to it don't know to recognize, signs of.
One thing I thought we could pick up on is the utility of these mobile platforms and apps. I don't really know a lot about it. I'm just incredibly interested in what it means, and not just for psychiatry, but I think for neurology as well. I think this is, we've been asked at this conference to provide maybe some direction on what's actionable when people leave, and I think this is an incredibly valuable area across CNS. And so
we had a very interesting session. There were about 35 of us who brought together of sort of experts in geriatric, Alzheimer's, and technology, and it was sponsored and worked with Google. And it was to do some innovative exploration about how Google Glass, which I understand is a little bit in trouble commercially right now, but this was about a year ago, how Google Glass might be applied. And the short answer is that out of that session came the idea that Google Glass could be used as a sort of prosthesis for early Alzheimer's, which one could imagine. So I think things like that, where you apply wearables, you apply Internet of Things technologically, could be very, very exciting.
Yeah, and I think across the spectrum of the diseases, we all have phones. Anybody doesn't have one? So, answer?
apparently we're not going to have them
No,
in 5 years.
according to yesterday's sessions, we won't have phones
Which
very
might be
soon.
true.
Right.
But you asked also why did we see failures, also because we kept doing clinical development the old way, which is you get your medication, you go away, you come back after a month, and the physician sees you and measures how you're doing. So there's a month in between.
So how do you change that?
Well, one of the things, and Stephen Friend from Sage, for instance, is working on this together with Apple, is can we come to an understanding of, well, are there things we can sample on an ongoing basis? And for one example I can give for Alzheimer's disease is apparently walking speed could be an early readout of Alzheimer's. And of course, these phones measure that all the time. That's how you get your steps in and saying, yes, I did good.
So it's almost like a Holter monitor
Continuous
for
monitoring,
Exactly.
right.
And that could be an avenue to significantly increase the data volume and reduce just the impact that is there from having these very seldom samples of the condition.
And A.J. Verma at the presentation yesterday said something I think is absolutely correct. He's like, not too long from now, your house is going to diagnose you. And it sounds kind of
That's
Right.
scary, because nothing knows more about me than my house.
Then your fridge.
That's the beauty. Yeah, no, yeah, your fridge is going to be like, you have some blue thoughts today. Are you really, maybe you're on the road to depression.
Of course, my wife might know more about me than our house, just slightly. Hey, I just
absolutely true.
I just want to come back to the psychiatric spectrum again. And I know that, Michael, maybe this is a little bit out of your lane, but I think you could probably address this. We talk about all of this in the context of national security. And though the episodes are rare, there is a national security component to mental illness as well. If you look at the guy that flew the Lufthansa jet into the Alps, if you look at the guy who's on trial in Aurora, Colorado right now for shooting up the movie theater, if you look at the guy who killed all of those children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, not too far from where we are right here in Connecticut. So is there an urgency, Michael, and Tom has said that R&D has really been pulled back in terms of looking for new psychiatric drug targets. Do we risk national security implications if we don't restart that whole project?
Yes, and we also risk not getting ahead of the curve. And I think for me, the public policy takeaway, in a way, is very simple. If you take two driving trends, one is technological innovation, which is allowing us to know and learn much more quickly, real time, about what's happening, for better and worse sometimes, but we know it. Combined with the other trend of aging, you have this huge need around the kind of topics that we're discussing. And we have to, therefore, reset how we think about spending on health and spending on scientific basis for addressing health, which is to say not as a cost but as an investment. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge culture shift. But maybe it's not dissimilar from the culture shift that we took sometime in the beginning of the 20th century and then after World War II, when we thought about spending on education for the children, which I think we would all support. And we did it because not only was it children, but because the future of our society was at stake. Well, I would say today, with these other factors, our future is going to be dependent on spending on health and investment, and treating it as an investment, not a cost.
Yeah. Luke, you said that we kind of approach Alzheimer's disease the wrong way. We wait until disease process manifests itself with symptoms, and then we try to treat the symptoms, or we try to dial back, or at least make some improvement in what nature has already wrought. You say we need to bring that curve way back to maybe in your 30s or 40s you start being checked out for this, but there still are very few early biomarkers that we can look at.
Yeah, and this is where science does show significant progression through public-private partnerships. I think ADNI, so the neuroimaging initiative that was run, gave us insights that, and we should move away from talking about Alzheimer's dementia to talking about Alzheimer's disease. And that is something which starts much earlier. We should think about Alzheimer's disease as not a disease of the 80-year-old, but a disease that we all in this room are at risk of already. And that should drive our sense of urgency. And we can have the window on our brains now with the PET scan, with amyloid or tau imaging, which we didn't have 10 years ago. So that is indeed an evolution that drove that thinking.
I know it's one of the things that makes me wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night very often is I've forgotten something, I maybe misplaced a word or my keys or whatever, and oh my gosh, am I following down the steps that my mother followed down, or am I just being a little forgetful because I'm overtired? You don't know.
But this is where we have a bit of a schizophrenic, forgive me the pun, to use that from mental health view on this, because on the one hand we learn this, on the other hand, because of the anxiety and the stigma associated with actually identifying the presence of the disease, we don't go for this, which is why, for instance, the reimbursement for PET scanning is held up. So you get in the way of being able to detect in the field this disease, and it kind of, for me, is a weird thing. We know by all the numbers that this is coming, yet we don't put things in place that could allow us to say, you know what, John, you are indeed at a higher risk.
But yeah, go ahead.
Just on that point, because I think it's an interesting kind of strategic political possibility. I wonder what you or others might think. If it is the case that many of us in this room were much younger than one would expect, so let's say as as far down as into your early to mid 50s, we now have the technical capability to see that we really have the possibility of, and then it'll be 10 or 15 years before it begins to emerge in the way that we understand it, and another 10 or 15 years before it would really address it. So now, if you could create a kind of political constituency based on, you know, a couple thousand 52-year-olds who say, if I really made the effort to find the cure and put a political effort behind it, it then becomes like HIV/AIDS or breast cancer, both of which are very much distinguished from Alzheimer's by the political constituency that are directly involved. Now you have caregivers who are involved, but you don't have direct people.
Yep.
That would create that.
I think that would create a public voice, which is actually missing across mental health, right? Because of the stigma. There is no public voice. And I don't know what the average age of Congress is, but with the data we have in hand, you can kind of start estimating how many people in that constituency are at risk.
But it's not a constituency that is given to activism, if you will.
Well, I think the way to approach this, as Mike said, is we need to start thinking about cognitive health being equal to economic wealth, because otherwise we'll become in an unsustainable situation, and our kids, as Mike already said, will be the bearer of that burden.
But as you said, that very phrase turns off major bodies like the World Health Organization.
That had more to do with who was proposing it, I think, than the message.
Another way to think about it is that, you know, non-communicable diseases, which include Alzheimer's. It's interesting, by the way, definition is by terms of what it is not. So public health historically has been about communicable diseases because it has been, in my opinion, correctly, about the huge risk to whole populations. And you see, you know, pandemics as a result of tuberculosis or bird flu, or whatever it is. Well, if you were to look at the explosion of the number of people that are at risk in some of the areas we're talking about, including Alzheimer's, you would look at a map that looks like a pandemic. It doesn't behave like the old pandemic of the 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, but it is a pandemic in terms of the numbers at risk. And now we have the technical capability even to understand that. So, you know, you have to kind of reframe and reshape the dialogue. We need a new language. We need a new way to think about it.
I mean, the irony is this is a pandemic that is 100% predictable. It's not a matter of if. It is going to happen. So either we come together and action on it or not.
Luke, you mentioned a moment ago that maybe people of our ages or even younger need to start undergoing PET scans, functional MRI, whatever. I can see that the cost of that is a cost burden that we're going to add in the early stages as opposed to the later stages at the very least. And who knows if we may still, if we don't find some sort of cure or treatment for Alzheimer's disease, bear the cost of the later stages as well. So who's going to pay for that? And Miri, is it possible for technology to, without going all the way to a PET scan or a functional MRI, to, as Luke was saying earlier, with your steps or whatever, the way that you're walking, find those potential that potential for latent disease earlier in life without expending thousands of dollars on diagnostics?
Obviously that would be amazing if we could, you know, if we could find technologies that will help us. I think not only diagnose early or detect early signs, but maybe there'll be tools in the future that'll help us somehow prevent certain illnesses, or at least maintain a certain level of cognition, even maybe after we've been diagnosed. Maybe there'll be tools. Now there's a new app that I just learned about that's helping like post-stroke and post-brain injury rehabilitation. And these are apps that are, you know, going through, they're being accepted into accelerator and incubator programs funded by Microsoft and you know, big companies that are, they recognize that it's a huge market. And so everyone's focused on, you know, the cognitive health. And so,
I mean, this is a question for the folks who really work on AD. My guess is it's going to be genetic profiling that's going to be the cheapest first thing that folks are going to do to gauge their kind of range of risk factors, which then
and where are we on deducing that?
I think we're
Well,
darn-
ApoE4 is kind of the most associated one. That's the most wide. I mean, you have, of course, the familial forms, but that's the minority. But ApoE4, together with age, it seems to be one of the strongest predictors. Now, this is where you then end up in another conundrum about, well, if you have ApoE4, both chromosomes, your risk is kind of doubled. And what do you do with that information in the context of, okay, we don't have an effective treatment? And that's where often people get hung up. My view on that is, if you stay hung up on that and you're not going to get into a clinical trial or whatever, you become part of the problem. You're not acting then on the information.
Well, how do projects like the NIH Brain Initiative that was launched in 2013, others in Europe and Japan, as well as the International Genomics of Alzheimer's Project factor into that? Are they showing, I guess, particularly the Brain Initiative, it's kind of like a human genome project for the brain. Is that showing any promise yet?
Well, it's recent, so
in the U.S., it's just starting, so it's a little bit too early. The goal is perfectly reasonable, and we need it. Europe's been going, started a little bit earlier on it. They've got some bureaucratic and kind of leadership disruption, and they're going through a review process. Are they spending the money in the right place? Are they asking the right questions? I mean, they'll sort it out, I think, and I think there's going to ultimately be an attempt to merge those two efforts. I think we've also heard about one from a similar one, although lower funding on the Japan side. So that's going to be great for every CNS illness, from neurology to neurodegeneration, even into pain. If we can map the functional circuitry in the brain, it's going to be 10 years. It's a little frustrating for folks in pharma who want to be working on new drugs now for patients. But it's got to be done, and only the governments can do it. The pharma will never have the resources to be able to do this. We can contribute thinking, et cetera.
You know, there's another national security issue that comes to mind, and it's kind of a reverse national security issue. We've been talking about how disease may create a national security crisis via the economy in the future, but what about all of these military members who've been at war for more than a decade in Iraq and Afghanistan? They are the ones who are executing our national security policy, and they are coming back with traumatic brain injury. They're suffering from depression. Suicide rates are extremely high in returning members of the military. And what happens? Does a traumatic brain injury perhaps increase the chances of somebody developing cognitive decline, dementia, or Alzheimer's later in life, and how do we address that?
Yeah, so I think that's probably true on the TBI side. I would admit to actually underestimating the extent of the problem until I started to look at the numbers. And PTSD, I think, is easily as big, if not bigger, a problem than traumatic brain injury, because about a third of the servicemen will exhibit elements of PTSD, so about 500,000 is the current estimate for suffering vets. And there's really nothing for PTSD, and it's going to be a big economic burden. And anything that is developed for PTSD is going to help on anxiety, on depression, and some of these other illnesses for which there's tens and hundreds of millions of folks. So, like I said, I really wasn't paying too much attention to PTSD maybe a year ago, and now I see it as both a huge economic burden, a big patient population, and if you can find drugs, it'll leverage out into these other spaces. That's going to be really valuable.
Is that a target for pharmacology, or is it more behavioral modification? I was speaking with a researcher at Emory University who has developed a virtual reality treatment for intractable PTSD, which seems to be getting some pretty good results.
So and so just to go back to this theme of neurotechnology, mobile or virtual reality or software, I think the area in the country Israel's doing great in this space. Boston's pretty good. San Francisco is great because you got Silicon Valley folks who don't really know much about neuroscience, but they know virtual reality and software and things, and they're starting to apply things. So I've seen some really interesting things on virtual reality control of pain management, virtual reality combined with therapeutics, drugs for PTSD. It's still early stage, but your gut instinct is this is definitely the right path. And so will we cure PTSD with a pill? I think we may help it, but it combined with virtual reality and some of the neurotechnology, That I could see as being really synergistic and making a huge difference. And again, not a space I know a lot about, but one that I think pharma companies should be partnering with the Silicon Valley folks and the high-tech folks.
Mike?
So just, we keep coming back to the money, and is about the kind of funding which is connected, I would suggest, to the politics. And, you know, one of the big tensions, which we haven't addressed yet, but it comes up everywhere, is, and it will become even more dramatic because of the aging of the population, is do you spend money on caring for people or on finding the cure? You know, anyone would want to say both. You know, in times of budget crunches everywhere around the planet, it's hard to really know how to do that. So, not that on this one I have an answer, but I will suggest that in some of these spaces, and Alzheimer's is one in particular, dementia, Alzheimer's, there's a huge debate between and among and within the community, quote unquote, do you spend money on care or on finding the cure? And for every year and every decade that goes by where we aren't spending the money to try to understand the basic science, we're spending money on care, but meanwhile we're finding, you know, warehousing. We're going to warehouse tens of millions of people around the planet. So it's a huge problem.
Right. Do you think that part of the reason for that is that there's it's almost a bias against a disease that's seen as an end-of-life disease? It's like, well, Uncle Harry's going to die in 3 or 4 years anyway, so what does it matter if he has his faculties or not?
I think that's absolutely part of that dynamic. And maybe I should have said it. So Alzheimer's disease is not part of normal aging. That's the other lesson we learned, right? So, and that again goes into, so everybody's, and my own grandmother, for example, that ultimately lost capability to take care of herself, actually had Alzheimer's disease. We tended to say, well, they're so old, that's normal. It is not. And I think that's the other educational piece that we need to really get, you know, out there.
Yeah,
Maybe we need to redefine normal. I mean, if every, you know, every 2 people after, every 1 in every 2 people after age 85, right? So.
But the other part of it, you're absolutely,
what's normal?
You're absolutely right. As a scientist, as the scientist, I defer to you. But even if it were so, you know, what's the answer? Euthanasia? I mean, we have 1 of 2 solutions. We can either say, you know, we're going to do something about it, or we're going to kill everyone. Because we can't afford the care that's going to be required for the tens of millions around the globe in this kind of disease. Again, it's not a disease where, you know, you're going to go in a year or 2. It's going to be hanging around for 8, 10, 12, 15 years that will bankrupt entire families and communities.
Why can't people see that?
Because we're in environments in which policies are set with 5 years time horizons, because that goes into your election cycle.
With what's been going on in Congress lately, it's more like 5-week horizons.
Okay, well, okay, yes. So, but that's the part of the point, because this requires a concerted, sustained investment, and so a deliberate choice to say, we know it's difficult now, let's kind of roll back on things and focus on this.
And Luke, as you said of Prime Minister Cameron, who did take a leadership position on this and has dedicated political effort and real money, it takes leadership. We don't have that in this country. It doesn't exist today in Japan. It doesn't exist in China, places that are even at greater risk than we are. But again, I would go back to a point I made earlier, which is that this is all new. This longevity thing is a new phenomenon, and we're just beginning to understand the implications of it, not only in this area like Alzheimer's we've been talking about, but in areas of what does the period from 55 to 90 look like in the 21st century? We've never done it before.
I've been told 60 is the new 30. At least I'm hoping so.
Especially if we can, you know, avoid Alzheimer's.
But when you look at developments in medicine, there's an interesting conundrum here. The longevity track is far exceeding our ability to deal with it.
Right.
Well, but that is to do with the fact that the treatments for that really expanded life, you know, antibiotics, some cardiovascular risk, the anti-diabetic drugs, were actually of a low complexity in terms of what the intervention meant. They just were able to move the dial enough. And now we're faced with diseases that are much more complex to treat. So the complexity factor, that's also why this productivity curve that earlier today we were talking about occurred, where there's a huge disconnect between output of new drugs and investment, is because the easy things have solved and have had big impacts on life. Now, dealing with the consequences of an aging body is a much more complex endeavor.
So how to deal with this? Is it researchers toiling away in small laboratories, maybe in conjunction with a pharmaceutical company here or there, everybody investigating this avenue, that avenue, or do you get the global community together in some sort of massive Manhattan project to try to solve the Alzheimer's puzzle?
Yes.
Yes, that's the moonshot.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only.
But it's
and by
gotta
the
be
way,
a
it's the
global
right-
moonshot.
By the way, it's the right answer because it is a global problem. And if but our European friends who pretend to care a lot about the developing world, emphasis on pretend, you know, they ain't seen nothing when they start looking at what's going to happen over the next 2 decades as longevity kicks in Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Latin America. So
I guess the reason why there's very little incidence of Alzheimer's disease in sub-Saharan Africa is simply because of life expectancy.
yeah. So as life expectancy continues, which is happening, thank God, modernization, urbanization, you know, we're going to experience this across the planet. And as Luke said, it's predictable. We actually have the numbers on it.
We've come just about to the end of the session, but what I wanted to let you do is maybe just have a couple of minutes each to wrap up, give us some thoughts. And one of the things that I'd like to know, Luke, is if we don't address this in the immediate term, if we don't really get on the stick with this, where are we going to be in 10 or 20 years?
Well, in 10 or 20 years, the US will pay about $1.2 trillion a year just taking care of the people. And that will get in the way of being able to do other things that are good for the country. And that story is the same across the world. So to me, it's not should we? This is we absolutely must, and this starts with everybody in this room.
And what are you going to do in the next decade to address this situation?
Well, I'll do my job, which is to bring these initiatives together on a global scale, align them so we can cross-pollinate them and share the data.
What's got promise right now?
Well, one of the key things we need to do is to have a faster track from bench science to showing in the clinic this works, so that translation. And we just need to make that faster. And one of the key pieces we're missing is what we had in HIV, which was viral load. We do not have that kind of rapid measure of success of a compound. So I think that's going to be a key of success, and that can actually is tractable with the right amount of funding.
Tom, your target is a little bit different, but no less of an economic burden in the years to come.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the panel, I talked about the crisis in psychiatry, and it is quite grim. There are some things to be hopeful about, and I think that will make a difference. So first of all, we have to learn from the failures of the last 20 years, the things that didn't work in terms of getting new mechanisms and new drugs, and I think we're trying to do that. Secondly, I think at a personal level, scientists and pharma companies need to be probably a little less arrogant about what we think we know. So the brain is incredibly complex. We know way less than we believed we knew about it, which led to some of our failures. So a little less, more humble approach to what we don't know. I think the big initiatives on mapping the circuitry in the brain by US, EU, et cetera, is going to be really valuable. And coming back to the partnership thing, I mean, basically in psychiatry, there's fewer people in the lifeboat working in psychiatry, and so we're going to have to work together in a different way. Now, I can't control the funding. I'm a little worried it's going to continue to kind of leak out. But whether it's the Mass Life Sciences Consortium, whether it's going to Israel and seeing the entrepreneurial stuff going on there, and the high tech and virtual reality things, we could, in a few years, be coming back to this conference, revisiting neuroscience and saying, here's where we really improve things, whether it's on the neurology or the psychiatry side. So there are some things that are happening that could rescue us, I guess, and bring some new things forward.
Miri, what have you got in the pipeline that excites you? What terrifies you?
I mean, our target, you know, our visionary behind the establishment of IBT was a young guy who actually, you know, he was 90 years old when he, you know, announced that, you know, Shimon Peres, the former president, he does a pretty good job of aging. He's the one who, you know, was behind this project, and he really, our target, his vision was that, you know, Israel would really contribute significantly to, you know, to addressing these issues through sort of the unique combination of Israel's, you know, strengths in both neuroscience, but also the entrepreneurial spirit and the risk-taking culture, and, you know, being the startup nation. So you know, our goal is to kind of turn startup nation into what we call brain nation, and hopefully, you know, we'll see some breakthrough technologies across all the different disease areas and the different modalities. I think, you know, in the future, the treatment will be very, and it's been touched on in previous panels, you know, there'll be multiple modalities working together to take care of ourselves and our family members. So I'm just hoping that, you know, as a nonprofit initiative, I'll do a good job of, you know, bringing as many partners in as possible on both a local and a global scale, and just try to gather up as much support as I can from government, from industry, from philanthropy. I think philanthropy is playing a very, very a growing and important role in filling in the gaps where there isn't enough funding coming in, not enough support and focus coming into some of these diseases.
Is that what terrifies you, is lack of funding?
I think it probably terrifies all of us. Yeah, so we all need to do a really good job of, you know, of lobbying for the funding. It's not that the money isn't there, it's a matter of priorities, right?
Dr. Doom, why don't you finish us off?
So one is that because it's in the context of this aging phenomenon, that this is understood as the fiscal nightmare it is becoming. Because of that, we need to do this for the children and their children. And thirdly, actually, to end on a positive note, John.
That's surprising.
When I see in this global coalition that we've created that I told you about at the beginning, when I see the BlackRocks and the Nestle's and the GE's and the J&J's and the Intels coming together, this cross-sector collection of companies that are interested in this topic broadly, and in particular, every one of them has an interest in one way or another in the Alzheimer's piece. That's pretty good news. And in that sense, I'm optimistic that we can get there.
All right. Well, Michael and Miri, Tom and Luke, thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I know that it's been a long day here, but thank you for your rapt attention. They'll be available for photographs and autographs after the session. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.